The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the rolling plains, brushing the horizon with soft streaks of amber and rose. The scent of damp earth and new grass filled the air, mingling with the faint perfume of wildflowers that had begun to bloom along the edges of Garrett McAllister's land. He stood outside his cabin, tall and broad-shouldered, hands calloused and strong from years of working the ranch. The horses shifted their weight nervously in the corral, ears flicking toward the distant tree line, as if sensing the stillness pressing against the edges of the twilight. Garrett's jaw tightened, not from fear but from the endless solitude that clung to him like a shadow. Out here on the high plains, a man learned quickly that the land gave what it would, and men took only what they could carry. A soft rustle broke the rhythm of the evening. Garrett's gaze lifted, narrowing at the faint figure moving between the trees. She was slight, almost impossibly small against the vastness of the prairie, her yellow dress brushing against the fresh grass. The bundle clutched in her arms suggested fragility, yet her steps carried a quiet determination that drew Garrett's attention. He felt the old familiar pull of caution, and something else, unnameable, tugging at the edges of his chest. The girl emerged fully into view, her dark hair catching the last golden rays, her eyes wide and trembling. She paused at the edge of the clearing, uncertain, almost afraid. Garrett's instincts told him to turn away, to retreat into the safety of his solitude. Yet the hesitation in her posture, the trembling of her small hands around the bundle, made something deep inside him shift. A soft knock sounded at the cabin door, almost imperceptible above the gentle whisper of wind through budding branches. Garrett's muscles coiled. He took a step toward the door, boots crunching lightly on the gravel path. The knock came again, timid, hesitant, and it carried with it a weight that made him stop mid-step. I have no one left." A voice whispered, fragile and raw, yet carrying the firmness of someone accustomed to surviving on the margins of the world. "Can I stay here just tonight?" The words struck him like a sudden gust of wind. He froze, the rough lines of his face softened by the recognition of desperation and fear. He had seen hardship before, loss before, but the intensity in her eyes, the silent plea behind the words, made him swallow hard. The world outside seemed to pause. A distant crow cawed, the horses shifted, and the soft murmur of the prairie wind carried her plea straight into the depths of his guarded heart. "It's dangerous out here," he said slowly, his voice low and uncertain. "Why should I trust you?" Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Because I have nowhere else," she breathed, barely above a whisper, and the weight of her words pressed against him like the first frost on spring soil. Garrett's jaw clenched, the muscles tightening as he wrestled with himself. Part of him wanted to shut the door and return to the emptiness that had become his companion. Another part, buried deep, urged him forward, to step past the caution, to offer the shelter that neither of them had known they needed. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The sun dipped lower, spilling its last light across the cabin's worn wood. The girl's hand brushed the doorframe, hesitant, trembling, and Garrett's gaze softened, the hard edges of his features giving way to something gentler. A part of him had always believed that isolation was safety, yet he found himself considering that maybe, just maybe, trust could be stronger. He opened the door, slowly, deliberately, his large frame filling the threshold. She stepped inside, the warmth of the cabin washing over her chilled body, carrying with it the smell of cedar and hay. Garrett handed her a blanket without a word, and her fingers brushed against his calloused hands as she took it. She smiled faintly, small and uncertain, and the simple act, the contact, the acknowledgement, stirred something long dormant in him. Outside, the wind whispered through the budding trees, and the first stars began to pierce the dimming sky. The horses settled in their corral, the gentle snorts mingling with the distant call of a night bird. In the cabin, Lena wrapped the blanket around her thin shoulders and bowed her head over a small bowl of warm broth Garrett had set before her. The silence between them was not empty. It was loaded with unspoken understanding, with the fragile beginnings of trust. "May the Lord watch over us tonight," she whispered softly, barely audible, and Garrett nodded once, almost imperceptibly. His gaze lingered on her, and for the first time in a long while, he wondered if solitude had been a comfort or a cage. The wind gusted again, pushing through the cabin door, carrying the scent of spring rain and wildflowers. Lena looked up, eyes wide, her lips parted as if to speak again, but Garrett remained silent, towering behind the warmth of the firelight. Outside, the prairie waited, endless and uncertain, and somewhere in the distance, the soft echo of another knock, or perhaps a shadow, stirred against the edge of the twilight. Rain began to whisper against the cabin roof just after dusk, a soft patter that grew into a steady rhythm as the storm rolled across the plains. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, of sage and budding wildflowers flattened beneath the early spring shower. Inside, Garrett McAllister moved with deliberate care, tending to the fire while keeping a wary eye on Lena, who had been quiet since her first sip of broth. Her dark hair clung damply to her forehead, and the pale yellow dress she wore seemed almost luminescent in the flickering firelight. Lena stood by the window, small fingers tracing the raindrops streaking the glass. She shivered, not from cold, but from the unease that had nested deep in her chest, a weariness born from nights spent sleeping beneath the open sky. Garrett noticed and stepped closer, placing a large, warm hand on her shoulder. "You're shaking," he said, voice low and careful. "You'll catch a chill if you stay by the window." I'm used to being alone," she whispered, eyes downcast. "And storms remind me of those nights I had nowhere to hide." Garrett's chest tightened at her words. He had fought loneliness all his life, and hearing it spoken by someone so young stirred a protective impulse he could not ignore. He gestured toward the small hearth, and Lena took her place near the warmth, clutching the blanket he had given her. The cabin smelled of cedar, rain, and the faint iron tang of horses, a comfort that grounded them both amid the storm's restless energy. "I taught myself how to survive," Lena continued, voice softer now. "Mother tried, but she's gone. And father, he never came back." Her words faltered, but Garrett did not interrupt. He simply watched, silent, giving her the space to voice the grief she carried like a hidden wound. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the cabin door. Garrett tensed, ears straining toward the distant hills where the faint sound of hooves echoed. A boy's voice broke the moment. "Mr. McAllister, they say rustlers are near. You got anyone else here?" Garrett's broad shoulders stiffened. Tommy, the boy from the neighboring homestead, stood at the edge of the rain-soaked clearing, drenched and wide-eyed. Garrett crouched slightly to meet his gaze. "Go back home, Tommy," he said, voice firm yet calm. "We can handle ourselves." Tommy hesitated, glancing at the cabin, then nodded reluctantly and disappeared into the sheets of rain. Lena's eyes followed the boy, wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. Garrett turned back to her, his expression softened by concern, and the storm outside mirrored the tension he felt inside. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Lena finally spoke again, voice trembling but earnest. I thought no one would ever care for me again." Garrett exhaled slowly, the weight of his own solitude pressing against his ribs. "I reckon maybe you were wrong about that," he murmured, almost to himself, but she heard it. A fragile smile flickered across her lips. The storm outside intensified. Thunder rumbled softly over the plains, and flashes of lightning illuminated the room in stark, fleeting bursts. Lena's hands instinctively clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Garrett reached over, brushing a damp lock of hair from her face. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of shared loneliness, of two hearts momentarily aligned amid the chaos of the world. Do you think anyone ever comes back from losing everything?" Lena asked, voice barely audible over the storm. Garrett considered her question carefully. "A man can lose much and still stand," he said finally, "but he don't stand alone for long if someone shows him the way." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not only for sorrow. There was hope there, fragile yet undeniable. She lifted her gaze to the window again, watching the rain streak the glass, the world outside chaotic and untamed, yet somehow beautiful. For a moment, silence settled between them, broken only by the storm's rhythm. Garrett's mind wandered to the vulnerability she carried, the bravery she had shown merely by knocking on his door. He felt the walls around him, the isolation he had built so carefully, cracked slightly under the weight of her presence. Lena finally turned from the window, her lips parting as if to say something more, yet no words came. Garrett's hand hovered near hers, almost instinctively, as if ready to bridge the gap she hesitated to cross. The wind gusted, rattling the cabin one last time, carrying the distant howl of the plains and a sense that the world outside was brimming with both danger and possibility. In that charged silence, with firelight and storm entwined, Lena's voice came at last, barely above a whisper. Whatever comes, I won't run this time. Garrett's jaw went tight, the muscles taut with thought and feeling. Outside, the rain fell harder, masking footsteps approaching in the darkness. Unseen, uncertain, and bringing with them the first hint of the danger that would test them both. The storm had eased into a soft, persistent drizzle by midnight, the plains beyond the cabin shrouded in silver moonlight. The scent of wet earth mingled with the faint smoke of the dying fire, curling into the corners of the cabin like a protective embrace. Garrett McAllister stood by the door, rifle in hand, muscles coiled, listening to every creak of timber, every distant whistle of wind. Lena crouched near the hearth, her small frame trembling not from cold, but from the quiet tension that saturated the night. She had learned quickly that silence in the wild west carried weight. It was often the herald of danger. A faint sound reached them first, a distant snapping of twigs, then the unmistakable rhythm of hooves on mud-slicked earth. Garrett's eyes narrowed, jaw set, instincts honed over years of solitary life flaring into vigilance. He motioned for Lena to stay close. "Stay back, Lena," he whispered, voice low but steady. "Whatever happens, don't make a sound." Her dark eyes met his, wide and trusting. I'm not leaving you," she said, voice barely above the storm's memory. It was not defiance, but a declaration of loyalty, fragile yet unwavering. Garrett's chest tightened at the words, the enormity of their unspoken bond pressing against him like the weight of the night sky. The first bandit appeared at the edge of the clearing, shadowed by the moon, followed by two more. They moved cautiously, whispering to one another, unaware of the vigilant eyes behind the cabin door. Garrett's fingers gripped the rifle, knuckles white. He could feel the tension thrumming through Lena as she huddled closer to the fire, her heart echoing the rhythm of his own. The first shot rang out, sharp, precise. Garrett fired, a calculated warning that made the attackers pause. Lena gasped, instinctively ducking behind a barrel. Another shot, and one of the bandits collapsed, and the rest faltered, their resolve faltering in the face of a giant man defending what was his. Yet it was not only strength that kept Garrett ahead. It was the patience honed from countless quiet nights on the plains, waiting for the perfect moment to act. "Lena," he hissed, eyes darting toward her. "You need to help me with the horses. Quietly, understand?" She nodded, breath trembling, and crept toward the corner where the ropes and saddles were stored. Her fingers, nimble and careful, worked to free the nearest horse, whispering prayers under her breath. Each knot she untied was a testament to the courage that had brought her to this cabin, to this moment, to this man. Garrett's voice carried over the muted storm. "Stay low. I've got this." His tone was firm, yet beneath it was an undercurrent of something tender, protective, a promise that they would survive this night together. Lena's eyes lingered on him, awe and fear mixing, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerability behind his rugged exterior. The final bandit lunged forward, underestimating Garrett's reach. In one swift motion, Garrett struck him down, the sound of impact muffled by the rain and distant thunder. Lena froze, heart pounding, then scrambled to help the freed horse, leading it silently into the cabin's modest shelter. The storm seemed to hold its breath with them, nature itself a witness to courage, trust, and the fragile beginnings of connection. When silence returned, punctuated only by the dripping of rain, Garrett lowered his rifle, body still taut with adrenaline. He turned to Lena, eyes dark and intense, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then he stepped forward, enveloping her in a strong, protective embrace. "You were brave tonight," he murmured, voice breaking slightly under the weight of his admiration. "More than I expected, more than anyone would." Lena pressed her face into his chest, warmth radiating from him into her small, chilled body. "I had someone to fight for," she whispered, trembling, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Someone who believed in me." A silence followed, filled not with absence, but with understanding. Outside, the rain softened further, a gentle accompaniment to the quiet triumph of the night. Garrett's hands rested lightly on her shoulders, grounding her, grounding himself, as if the storm had not only passed over the land but through them both, leaving in its wake a clarity neither had dared hope for. Maybe we've both been missing something," he said quietly, almost to himself, yet meant for her ears alone. Lena lifted her head, meeting his gaze, and in that instant, something unspoken passed between them. a mutual recognition of survival, of trust, and the tentative stirrings of something deeper. The moonlight fell across the cabin floor, illuminating Lena's tear-streaked face and Garrett's hardened features softened by the night's trials. She whispered a prayer, a quiet benediction. "Thank you, Lord, for giving me a home again." Garrett's jaw loosened, a small, rare smile brushing across his face. Outside, the plain stretched into darkness and light, a promise of tomorrow framed by the gentle rise of spring hills. For now, the danger had passed, but the memory of it, the adrenaline, and the closeness it had forged between them would linger long after the storm. Then, from the edge of the clearing, a faint sound, hoofbeats, slower this time, deliberate, echoed through the night. Garrett's eyes narrowed. Lena pressed closer, and the cabin seemed to hold its breath once more.